The sting of the divorce was still too fresh, a jagged, unhealed wound in Eliza's heart. Not enough time had passed for her to fully piece herself back together, to remember the woman she was before the shattering revelation. Scott's infidelity had been a devastating blow, a betrayal that felt like a punch to the gut. But in her deepest, most hopeful moments, Eliza might have found a way to forgive him. Perhaps, if he had shown remorse, promised it would never happen again. Instead, he had looked her dead in the eye and declared with chilling finality that he loved this other woman, Sophia, and intended to build a life with her. "What about Jimmy? What about us?" Eliza had pleaded, her voice barely a whisper, echoing in their suddenly cavernous living room. "What about you?" Scott had retorted, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You'll manage, people do. You're not the first and you won't be the last. Let's skip the dramatics, Eliza. I love Sophia and I'm staying with her." The divorce itself had been a bruising battle, riddled with arguments and slights, most of them aimed squarely at Eliza. Scott had shown no intention to divide anything fairly. The spacious apartment, their marital home, had belonged to him before their marriage, a cold, hard fact she couldn't dispute. Yet, in a twisted act of what he likely considered generosity, he hadn't exactly thrown his ex-wife and their 7-year-old son, Jimmy, onto the streets. "You can have that old family house in the suburbs, right? You can live there," he had said with an unnerving indifference, as if suggesting she move to a distant storage unit. Eliza had no choice but to agree. So, now, she and little Jimmy lived in the quaint, slightly run-down 2-bedroom bungalow that had been her childhood home. The one thing her ex-husband hadn't contested, surprisingly, was custody of their son. With a sweeping, magnanimous gesture, Scott had left Jimmy with his mother, promising to help out when he could, and to visit sometimes. But from the moment they received the final divorce decree, Scott had vanished from their lives, a phantom father, sending not a single penny. Child support had been legally mandated, but it seemed Jimmy's father was entirely unconcerned with legalities or moral obligations. Eliza, however, was not a fighter. She didn't possess the temperament for aggressive pursuit, couldn't bring herself to demand or chase what was owed. Besides, she had no time for endless meetings with lawyers, for the soul-draining grind of court appearances. She reasoned that her time would be far better spent on earning money herself, relying on her own grit. She toiled as a mathematics teacher at the local high school, a job she loved, but one that paid modestly. To make ends meet, she had started tutoring students after school and on weekends. She was constantly exhausted, of course, but there was a quiet satisfaction in her independence, in knowing she depended on no one. Still, there were days, especially evenings like tonight, when her optimism simply clocked out, took an unannounced leave of absence. Outside, the darkness pressed against the window panes, a swirling, relentless December blizzard raging. Jimmy was long asleep, curled peacefully in his bed. A mountain of student essays and math problems awaited her red pen, seemed to grow rather than shrink, and her meagre bank account was almost bare until the next paycheck. On nights like these, her small house felt adrift, a lonely boat tossed on a vast sea of melancholy. Then a sharp, insistent knock echoed through the silence. Who on earth could it be, out in this weather? Eliza's heart gave a startled thump. It was clear no one would just drop by for a chat on such a treacherous night. Still, compelled by a sense of unease, she cautiously opened the door. Standing on her snow-dusted porch was an elderly man, completely unfamiliar, his shoulders hunched against the biting wind, his face etched with fatigue.
"Please, Mum, could I warm myself for a bit? I've lost my way. I'm freezing to the bone,"
the old man rasped, his voice strained.
"I just need a moment, even if it's here by the door."
Eliza noticed his clothing was utterly inadequate for the raging storm, a thin, worn jacket and trousers, offering no protection against the Arctic chill. Moved by a sudden overwhelming wave of compassion, she extended an invitation. "Why, goodness, no! Don't stand out here on the porch. Come in, take off your coat and come to the kitchen. I'll make you a hot cup of tea." She noticed him clutching a small bundled package tightly to his chest. "You can set your bundle right here. No one will touch it," she added reassuringly. In the warmth of her cosy kitchen, the old man slowly thawed. He explained he'd gotten hopelessly lost trying to navigate the unfamiliar suburban streets.
"In the city, I could find a shelter, but I can't make it back now. I'm dreadfully tired, and the weather's turned vicious."
He looked at her with pleading eyes.
Do you think I could stay the night?"
It was clear he was truly at his limit, barely able to stand. "Well, what else can I do?" Eliza sighed, a soft acceptance. "Of course you can stay. Only, as you can see, this isn't a mansion, and I don't have a guest room."
"Oh, I'll take the hallway, Mum. Any spot will do."
The old man waved a dismissive hand, his relief palpable. Despite his protests, Eliza insisted on settling him in the small spare room. The moment his head hit the pillow, he was instantly asleep. Eliza herself went to the kitchen to start on the dishes, when suddenly joyous shouts erupted from the hallway. "Mum, look!" Going to investigate, Eliza found Jimmy on the floor, giggling delightfully as he played with a tiny puppy that had somehow wriggled its way out of the old man's bundle. The little creature, now warm and active, had apparently decided to explore its new surroundings, waking Jimmy in the process. Eliza didn't feel a flicker of anger. Instead, she knelt and gently scooped up the fuzzy, trembling pup, a strange sense of warmth spreading through her. This, she thought, must be a good sign. She explained to Jimmy where the unexpected dog had come from. "So, he's going to live with us now? He's so cute!" Jimmy exclaimed, his eyes shining. "Well, it looks like he might have to," Eliza said, a bewildered but gentle smile touching her lips. "Now, off to bed, young man, it's late." She still didn't know what to do with the strange old man who had arrived with such an unexpected surprise in his arms. Sending them back out into the freezing night was unthinkable, but keeping them, how sensible was that? The next morning the unexpected guest awoke, showering her with heartfelt thanks, and finally began to tell his own story. The healer's secret.
"I won't lie to you, Mum. I was recently released from a prison," the old man began,
his gaze steady and clear, belying the weariness etched on his face. He watched Eliza's expression carefully, then continued, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in his voice.
"Don't be afraid. I'm not a thief, not a violent criminal. I used to be a doctor, back in the small town near my old home. My name is Walter Miller."
He took a slow sip of the warm tea Eliza had offered, the mug clutched in his gnarled hands.
"I was a good doctor too, I like to think. Treated people, and not just with conventional medicine. I had a knack for herbal remedies for the old ways, but not all illnesses can be cured, not by any method. One patient, after trying some of my more unconventional methods took a turn for the worse, and I was sent to trial."
He paused, a shadow passing over his eyes, heavy with unspoken grief.
"While I was inside, my life, well, it unravelled. My wife decided to move on and I lost everything. Julian, my only son from first marriage, was studying abroad then. A brilliant young man, hardly ever came home for visits. I never sought him out after that, and I don't intend to. Why would he want a father like me? It would only bring him shame, taint his future. He doesn't need to know about that part of my life."
Eliza sighed, a soft breath that rarely stirred the warm kitchen air. A strange, quiet conviction settled in her heart. She believed this man. It seemed fate had dealt him a harsh hand, particularly with his own family. She genuinely had no idea how she could help him beyond the immediate, except for one crucial thing. "Listen, Walter," Eliza said, her voice gentle but firm. "You can stay with us for a while. I won't turn you out into this blizzard. Not tonight, not ever. You can live here, and we'll see what tomorrow brings."
"Oh, thank you, Eliza. You have such a kind heart,"
Walter murmured, wiping a stray tear from the corner of his eye with a trembling hand, his relief palpable.
"But you see, I'm not alone,"
he added, gesturing with his chin towards the corner where the tiny puppy sat, now wide awake and curiously sniffing a table leg. "I see," Eliza chuckled softly. "We've already met. My son Jimmy doesn't want to part with him. He's quite attached. Even named him Charlie."
"Well, thank heavens for that,"
Walter said, a grateful smile spreading across his face.
"I found him half frozen in a snowdrift. The poor little creature. I didn't tell you last night. I was afraid. I thought you'd send us away. Didn't know your head yet. But don't you worry. I'm not looking for a handout. I'll make myself useful, you'll see."
However, that very evening, Walter fell gravely ill, a development that, considering his ordeal, wasn't entirely surprising. The bitter cold, coupled with his inadequate clothing and the strain of his journey, had taken its toll. He developed a racking cough, his breath wheezing, and a high fever quickly set in. "Right, I'm calling a doctor," Eliza announced, her voice tinged with alarm, reaching for the phone. But Walter weakly shook his head, stopping her.
"Oh no, please don't bother," he rasped, his voice rough. "I am a doctor, remember? What would they do? Take me to a hospital? And there, you understand, no one's going to bother with an old man like me, without a dime to his name. I'll treat myself, don't worry. Everything will be fine. I won't cause you any trouble."
Eliza doubted deeply that Walter could successfully treat himself, but he seemed to know exactly what he was doing. He scribbled a list of specific herbs and remedies for her to buy, then began a meticulous regimen of self-care.
"Don't you fret about me now,"
Walter reassured her, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested.
"Just go about your day. Don't even pay attention. I know exactly what I'm doing, how to take the medicine, even how to give myself an injection. I'll be right as rain in no time."
And indeed he became his own dedicated physician and nurse. Soon, to Eliza's astonishment, he began to make a remarkable recovery. "You're a true healer, Walter," she marvelled one morning, watching him move with newfound vigour. "Honestly, I was so worried. I almost secretly called 911.
"And it's a good thing you didn't," Walter chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here now."
Jimmy, too, was utterly fascinated by the old man's abilities. During the weeks Walter had been living with them, the boy had grown genuinely attached to him, always calling him Grandpa Walter. Jimmy was overjoyed to have a new kind person in their new family, especially since he had never known his own grandparents. "How did you heal yourself, Grandpa Walter?" Jimmy asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "Can all doctors do that?"
"No, little one, far from all," Walter replied gently, ruffling Jimmy's hair. "But every person, not just doctors, should know how to treat themselves in a pinch, and not just themselves either. It's a good thing to learn how to help others if the need arises."
"I want to be a doctor when I grow up," Jimmy declared, his small chest swelling with newfound purpose. "It's so sad to see other people hurting." And so, once Walter had fully recovered, he began to teach Jimmy a few basic, invaluable lessons.
"Well, whether you become a doctor or not, that's still a long way off," Walter said with a warm smile. "You're still young. You might change your mind a dozen times and want to be something else. But for now, let me show you a few things that might come in handy someday."
His lessons were truly captivating, practical skills that could prove useful in countless life situations. He demonstrated how to perform rescue breaths, how to apply chest compressions, how to properly bandage a wound, and how to staunch a bleeding injury. Jimmy eagerly absorbed the new knowledge, convinced that one day it would all truly be useful. And sometimes he even found opportunities to try out his new skills. "At recess today, a boy fell and scraped his knee, so I cleaned his wound and bandaged it up," Jimmy excitedly recounted that evening, his eyes shining. "The nurse said I did a really good job, and she thought my dad was a doctor. And I told her, 'No, not my dad, my grandpa.'" Walter gently stroked Jimmy's hair, a warm, knowing smile on his face, as he half-jokingly predicted a celebrated future for the boy in medicine. Jimmy swelled with pride. He finally had a grandpa, and not just any grandpa, one who could truly heal people, a quiet miracle worker. He was so proud, in fact, that for the upcoming parent-teacher conference at school, he brazenly asked Walter to attend with him instead of Eliza. Walter's eyebrows shot up in surprise.
"Why me, little man? Are you afraid they'll complain about you? Have you been causing trouble?"
"No, Grandpa, nothing like that," Jimmy quickly protested, shaking his head. "Mum would find out anyway. She works at the school. It's just, I don't want the teacher, Miss Jenkins, to announce in front of everyone that I haven't turned in some money for a trip to the museum. She's so mean, just plain nasty. She could easily tell Mum privately since they work together. But no, she has to make a big deal out of it in front of the whole class, and then Mum gets all upset. So you can just tell her we'll pay it, when we have the money."
"All right, I'll go, since you asked."
Walter conceded, a soft, melancholy smile playing on his lips. He could see that the family's financial struggles were indeed very real, and in this he felt powerless to help. Then an unexpected visitor darkened their doorstep. Scott. He stood before his ex-wife, a portrait of carefully curated guilt and a sudden, fervent desire for absolution.
"Well, Eliza, I hope we can put our past arguments behind us. We're still family, aren't we? We have a son together. I actually wanted to ask you a favour."
He looked at her, his expression unusually gentle.
"Let me have Jimmy for the weekend. Let him stay with me. We need to build our relationship, don't you think?"
This was a complete shock to Eliza. Her jaw dropped slightly. "What?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "Why this sudden interest in your son, Scott? Before, you never seemed to have any desire to connect with him. You haven't visited him once, and you haven't sent a single dime."
"Well, I didn't before," but I do now, and I will," Scott insisted, his voice earnest, almost fervent. "And the child support, don't worry, I'll pay you everything." He pressed on. "Surely, Eliza, you believe a person can change, can realise their mistakes." Eliza was genuinely taken aback by this sudden awakening of paternal feelings, a spring bloom in a barren emotional landscape. She agreed, though a subtle unease gnawed at the edges of her decision. She tried to soothe her doubts. Scott had never been a truly cruel man, just selfish and indifferent, and it was unlikely he intended to take Jimmy permanently, so what was there to worry about? If he genuinely wanted to build a relationship with his child, wasn't that a desire she should encourage? In reality, Scott's motives were entirely different, far more calculated. His boss, a man named Mr. Harrison, was coming to visit, a man known for his rigid adherence to traditional family values, for whom a stable home life was paramount. Mr. Harrison wasn't aware of Scott's divorce, but knew he had a wife and child, and now Scott needed to present a perfect, harmonious family tableau to his powerful supervisor. The role of wife, of course, could easily be filled by Sophia, the woman he lived with, but a son, well, he did have a son. On the drive home, Scott began to meticulously instruct Jimmy, his voice firm and unwavering. "We won't be alone, Jimmy. A very important man, my boss, is coming to visit. And there will be another lady, too. When this important man is around, you need to call her Mum, understand?" Jimmy's brow furrowed, a stubborn set to his jaw. "No, she's not my mum. I have my own mum. I don't need another one." "Don't be silly, kiddo," Scott insisted, his patience wearing thin. "You'll go back to your real mum tonight, and you can just forget everything that happened here. And if you see this woman another time, you can just call her Aunt Sophia. But just for tonight, when Mr. Harrison is here, you have to call her Mum. It's just a joke, a little game. Understand? You want to help your dad, don't you?" Jimmy, though bright for his age, nodded slowly, his mind churning with thoughts. Meeting his father's new partner later that evening, a fierce anger ignited within him. So this woman was why his dad had abandoned them. Because of her, his real mum had to work tirelessly, come home exhausted and cry herself to sleep at night. And he was supposed to call her Mum? No way, the boy decided. She was no one's mum. And so, the important guest arrived. Scott, oozing forced charm, presented his family. "Mr. Harrison," he beamed, gesturing expansively, "these are my loved ones. My dear wife Sophia, the keeper of the hearth and home, and my son Jimmy, a straight-A student, and a future chess grandmaster. He already plays wonderfully." Mr. Harrison, a man with a booming laugh and kind eyes, took Sophia's hand and gallantly kissed it, then shook Jimmy's hand like an adult. "He's a good guy. Why does Dad need to lie to him?" Jimmy thought, a quiet resolve hardening in his young heart. Sophia, putting on an exaggerated show for the guest and the child, invited everyone to the table, cooing at Jimmy and calling him sweetheart and my son every other word, a performance that made the boy's stomach churn with disgust. Choosing his moment carefully, Jimmy delivered his carefully planned line. "Thanks, Aunt Sophia, but Mum's salad is much tastier." Sophia froze, her mouth agape, a half-chewed bite of lettuce suspended mid-air. Scott, ever resourceful, quickly let out a nervous, forced laugh and began to explain. "He's just upset, Mr. Harrison. He had a little spat with his mother this morning and he's being stubborn. Just a little boy's way of being contrary, you know." "Oh, Jimmy, that's not right, is it?" Mr. Harrison chided, though his tone was gentle. "Your mum? She's a good and kind woman."
"My mum is much prettier, and this auntie isn't real," Jimmy shot back, his small voice ringing with conviction, louder this time, refusing to be silenced. He pointed a finger, unflinching, at Sophia.
"That's enough! Get out of here! You have no manners! Go to your room and play!"
Scott roared, his face flushing a dangerous crimson with anger, the mask of the charming host completely falling away. He grabbed Jimmy's arm, his grip too tight. "I don't have a room here, and I don't know how to play chess," Jimmy continued to defiantly expose his father's carefully constructed lie, even as he was pulled from the table.
"These modern kids, honestly, no respect."
A furious Scott yanked his son from the dining room, practically shoving him into a small, unused bedroom, sparsely furnished, and then stood over him, shaking his fist, a silent, menacing threat that promised retribution. The door slammed shut, echoing through the stunned silence of the dining room. Jimmy wasn't called back to the table. Later that evening, as he drove Jimmy home through the now light flurries, Scott fumed in resentful silence, his jaw clenched, rehearsing the angry tirade he was about to unleash on Eliza. The air in the car was thick with his unexpressed rage.
"You're not raising this child at all!"
Scott spat as he dropped Jimmy off, barely waiting for the boy to get out. He towered over Eliza on her small porch, his voice low but venomous.
"He acts like a juvenile delinquent. He humiliated me in front of a respected man, a man who could change my entire career. And you still have the audacity to demand child support. For what? For raising a thug? You won't get a single penny from me ever."
"We don't need your pennies anyway. Go to your Sophia," Jimmy shot back, fiercely defending his mother, standing protectively by her side.
"Oh, that's it. This is too much,"
Scott exploded, his face contorted.
"I'm calling Child Protective Services. You should lose your parental rights. They'll quickly explain to this hooligan how to behave in polite society at the foster home. You'll see what happens when you raise a brat."
Just then the front door of Eliza's little bungalow opened further, and Walter stepped out, his presence suddenly filling the small porch. His expression was stern, his gaze unwavering as he met Scott's furious eyes.
"What's all this noise?"
he demanded, his voice low, firm, and surprisingly authoritative.
"Why are you screaming at this woman and child? This is their home."
"Oh,
fantastic. She's running a den of vagrants now, a squat house."
Scott seethed, gesturing wildly at Walter, his accusations flying.
"Fine. Just wait for the authorities to show up. You'll both be sorry."
He lunged forward, but Walter, with an almost imperceptible shift of his weight and a precise, almost fluid movement that hinted at a forgotten past of athletic prowess or perhaps even self-defense training, deftly blocked his path. Scott stumbled back, momentarily thrown off balance, his furious threats fading into the snowy night, as he, sputtering, retreated to his car and sped away, tyres squealing on the icy asphalt. Eliza, shattered by the ugly scene, wrapped her arms around herself, trembling, fresh tears streaming down her face, glistening in the faint porch light. Jimmy gently comforted her, his small arms wrapping tightly around her waist. "It's okay, Mum," he whispered, his own eyes brimming. He explained how he had angered his father and promised with absolute certainty that he would never speak to him again. "We'll be just fine without him, Mum," the boy vowed, a fierce determination in his eyes. He already had a plan to help his mother, a secret resolve solidifying in his young heart. The next morning, Jimmy gathered his closest friends and classmates, all from families facing similar financial hardships, in their schoolyard. He quietly persuaded them to find suitable work, their breath clouding in the crisp autumn air. "What's so bad about handing out flyers?" the boy reasoned, his eyes shining with a new purpose. "We can earn some real cash, help our folks." His friends, intrigued by the idea of independence and contributing, agreed enthusiastically. Soon after, the kids were hired for a part-time gig, distributing brightly coloured advertisements for a newly opened, trendy bistro downtown. The pay, of course, was meagre, barely pocket change, but the children swelled with pride, their chests puffing out, knowing they were contributing, if only a little, to help their parents. One busy afternoon, as Jimmy rushed back to the bustling bistro for a new batch of flyers, his gaze, sharp and observant beyond his years, flicked through the large glass window. He saw a man seated at a table suddenly convulse, then collapse, sliding to the polished floor. Watching the man crumple, a wave of alarm surged through Jimmy, and he vividly recalled Walter's life-saving lessons. Without hesitation, he burst through the double doors, a tiny, determined figure cutting through the sophisticated chatter. "He's choking! We need to call an ambulance immediately!" the boy yelled, his voice surprisingly loud amidst the sudden hush of the restaurant, pointing at the prone man. "And while we wait, someone needs to do rescue breaths. I know how!" He pushed past the stunned, panicking adults, who seemed frozen in indecision, and immediately began the procedure Walter had taught him, tilting the man's head, clearing his airway. But what strength could an 8-year-old possess? Jimmy quickly realised he couldn't do it alone, his small arms straining, and the paramedics wouldn't arrive in time. "Please, someone help! His heart stopped!" he screamed, his voice strained, desperate, echoing through the suddenly silent room. "He needs chest compressions!" Fortunately, a decisive man, broad-shouldered and calm, who had been sitting at a nearby table, sprang into action. He knelt beside Jimmy, his face serious, and precisely followed every one of the boy's urgent, precise instructions. Together, with synchronized effort, they worked, and within what felt like an eternity, but was likely only minutes, the guest gasped a ragged breath, and colour began to return to his face. They had saved his life. The next day, Jimmy became a true local hero, his bravery praised in the local news and on social media for saving a man from certain death. The rescued man turned out to be Julian Harrison, a young prominent businessman known for his tech startups. He hadn't simply collapsed due to a random medical event. He'd been deliberately poisoned by a rival. A tasteless, odourless substance slipped into his food, a desperate act of corporate sabotage. Eliza learned of her son's heroic act later that evening, her phone ringing off the hook. A flurry of worried calls from friends and teachers, ending in overwhelming relief and pride. To her surprise, Jimmy wasn't entangled in the police investigation. He was simply a courageous bystander whose quick thinking had saved a life. A few days later, Julian himself arrived at their little bungalow, a sleek black car pulling up to their modest curb. Of course, he wanted to personally thank his young saviour, and his remarkable mother too. He presented Eliza with an enormous, vibrant bouquet of sunflowers, a cheerful burst of yellow, a silent testament to her extraordinary son.
"Jimmy, you saved my life,"
he said, his voice deep with sincerity, his eyes reflecting genuine awe.
"You're an incredible young man.
And Eliza," he turned to her, his gaze warm,
"you've raised an extraordinary son." "Who taught you how to save lives, Jimmy?"
Julian asked, his eyes twinkling as he looked from the boy to Walter.
"My grandpa did,"
Jimmy beamed, proudly pointing to Walter, who stood quietly to the side, almost shrinking into the shadows. Walter, however, was staring at the young businessman, his face a mask of profound shock, his breath catching in his throat, his usually calm demeanour shattered.
"Julian?"
he whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible, a ghost of a name. The businessman looked back, surprised by the emotional intensity, then his eyes widened in sudden, dawning recognition.
It can't be."
His own whisper was laced with disbelief, a flicker of hope and pain. Yes, it was father and son. After Walter's tragic medical incident and subsequent imprisonment, his manipulative wife had ruthlessly taken possession of his home and his assets, effectively erasing his son Julian from his life and inheritance, making it impossible for him to find his father. Julian had tried for years to locate him, sending out private investigators, following every faint lead, but to no avail. And now, after all this time, they had been reunited under the most incredible, life-saving circumstances imaginable, a twist of fate that felt like a miracle. It was no surprise, then, that Julian quickly became a cherished guest in Eliza's home. He visited frequently, not only to see his father and rebuild their fractured relationship, and not just to play chess and tell stories to Jimmy, with whom he forged a quick, strong bond, but also to spend time with Eliza herself. Their conversations flowed easily, from Jimmy's schoolwork to Walter's past, to shared dreams and gentle laughter. Indeed, a quiet, blossoming romance soon developed between Julian and Eliza, an unexpected comfort growing into something deeper, which, to the delight of their small circle, quickly blossomed into a joyful wedding a year later. Jimmy was no less happy than the bride and groom. He saw that his mother was finally truly happy, her smile genuine and light, a stark contrast to the weary sadness of before. And now he would have a father again, a loving, present father in Julian. And that meant Walter, the wise, kind man who'd stumbled into their lives one snowy night, would truly become his grandpa, solidifying his place in their new beautiful family. Charlie, now a magnificent, stately golden retriever, a loyal shadow to Jimmy, was also a guest of honour at the wedding, his tail thumping a steady rhythm of joy against the floor as the vows were exchanged. Strangely, Scott also showed up. He wasn't there to genuinely congratulate his ex-wife. His gaunt face and restless eyes betrayed his true intent. He was driven by a pure, mercenary interest. He had learned through the grapevine that Eliza was marrying a wealthy man, and he calculated it was the perfect, desperate opportunity to beg for a substantial loan, perhaps even an investment. The blissfully happy groom, Julian, a generous man by nature, was initially inclined to make a grand gesture, his heart full from the day's joy. But Eliza, now firmly standing as Julian's wife, her voice calm and resolute, gently dissuaded him. "It's not worth it, darling," she whispered, her gaze firm, her hand resting protectively on his arm. "He won't pay back a single penny. He still hasn't settled his child support, and he has no intention of doing so. Let him go." Julian listened to her, his trust in her absolute, his expression hardening slightly as he looked at Scott. Scott, seeing the closed doors, was left with nothing but his own bitter reflections as he walked away empty-handed, disappearing back into the obscurity from which he came.